far below NBA standard in regard to explosiveness and athleticism. Do not rely on him to run your team. Doesn't like when defenses are too physical with him. Not a great finisher around the basket due to his size and physical attributes.
We've probably all felt underrated at some point in our lives. Due to things out of our control, we get labeled and our prospects limited until we can somehow overcome those obstacles and prove our real worth. The new documentary about Steph Curry sheds more light on the familiar story about his journey to one of the best basketball players of all time. And I wanted to add some more insight, so I turned to his current coach, Steve Kerr, since he was in a unique position to scrutinize Curry in college. The underrated notion of this was that Curry's scouting report was way off, but coming out of college into the NBA. It just so happens that at that time, you were probably busy reading a lot of scouting reports. Do you remember what that was like in your role as GM with the Suns?
Oh, yeah. We watched him carefully. I remember seeing him for the first time at UCLA. Davidson played against UCLA actually in Anaheim at the John Wooden Classic. And he reminded us a lot of Steve Nash. And so we weren't as concerned about his size as a lot of the scouts were. I don't think anybody could have predicted, what he eventually became, but we thought he had a chance to be really good, and much like Nash, a guy who fit the modern game in terms of the skill set being able to check every box.
The first thing that jumped out at me watching the Davidson footage was how much Curry hopped into his shot from behind the arc. I definitely favor the hop as a shooting coach since it's faster and has better built-in rhythm. And it was a little striking to me considering we don't see him hop into his shots much at this stage in his NBA career. We don't have data from all his college games, but you can see at his peak in his sophomore year, he was taking a lot of catch-and-shoot threes, but having to work incredibly hard to get open on them. This should look familiar since he continues to run the same mileage with the Warriors in order to find a sliver of daylight against a defense that was geared to stop him. It would be easy for scouts to have said, there's no way he'd ever get these actions in the NBA. Teams didn't run offense like they were doing at Davidson. But that wasn't true at all. We had Richard Hamilton in his prime during this era, and you can see some similarities with the way he navigated screens into open spaces. Although this was before the three-point era, where coaches lacked the math skills to understand that most of these shots could easily be taken from behind the three-point line. That said, Rip was 6'6", and I'm sure the scouts felt the extra 3 or 4 inches was a world of difference. So none of those things about being too slow, being too small, getting pushed around, that didn't resonate with you guys as you were evaluating.
Well, I mean, it was a concern, but not a big enough concern to not draft him. We tried to trade up to draft him, and we weren't able to. But he was so much like Nash, and I think because we had watched, really Mike D'Antoni come in and change the way the NBA was played. That the Suns were kind of at the forefront of that, so it was maybe a little easier to see Steph stepping into a role where he could be a shot creator, shot maker, like Nash, because neither guy blew you away with the speed and bounce, but it was the balance and the coordination that was just so breathtaking.
If we examine some of his pick and roll possessions, you can definitely see what Coach Kerr is talking about. And with his willingness to shoot from behind the arc, you could argue his gravity was more profound than Nash, who, during his height, barely took 4 threes a game. Curry seemed a natural fit for the pick and roll game in the NBA with his passing and his ball handling and his shooting. So imagine that, bringing Curry into that, being mentored for a couple of years and then going right into that. I suppose that was what your thinking was, right? To sort of smoothly transition into the future.
Yeah, that was the idea. We get a great mentoring situation with Nash, and I remember Steve told me, he said, "Yeah, Curry's my favorite player in the draft. I'd love to play with him," but it wasn't meant to be. And it's something I think about pretty often because I'm glad it wasn't. I'm glad it wasn't meant to be because I never would have coached him here in Golden State.
It's crazy to think of the possibilities had Kerr drafted Curry in Phoenix. Perhaps they'd both still be there alongside Mike D'Antoni with multiple titles. But while that wasn't meant to be, you could all be pondering the possibilities of taking a swing at betting on Major League Baseball on FanDuel and get 10 times your first bet amount in bonus bets, up to $200. That's right, just bet $20 and you'll land $200 in bonus bets, win or lose. That's $200 you can spend betting on everything from the money line to the over-under to who you think is going to hit the first home run. All on an app that's safe, secure, and super easy to use. Plus, when you win, you can get paid instantly. There's no better place to bet on MLB than FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. So sign up today and visit FanDuel.com/Boston to get up to $200 in bonus bets, and you'll get great opportunities. And it ends up being his performance once Steve Kerr started coaching the Warriors that forced us to look back at Steph's college career, the place he was drafted, and realize he was underrated at that point. However, there is a big difference to what the Warriors did on offense that unleashed a player that would become a 2-time MVP, Finals MVP, 4-time NBA champion, and a guy who perhaps single-handedly dragged us into the modern era of basketball. And ironically, it was when Coach Kerr got Curry off ball a lot more that ignited their offense and one of the all-time great runs to a title, with his catch-and-shoot frequency jumping 13 points while maintaining an unheard-of effective field goal percentage. Suddenly, teams not only needed to deal with his absolutely lethal pick-and-roll game, both as a shooter and a facilitator coming out of Mark Jackson's offense, but now defenders had to navigate a pinball's worth of screens at full speed, with the consequences of the slightest mistake being a heartbreaking dagger three-pointer. Or not to mention, this motion dragged other defenders out of position so his teammates would get wide open layups just from his cutting off the screens.
All we tried to do, when I got here my first year, our staff just wanted to get a little more movement. Steph was so good off the ball in college, and then he was getting really good on the ball his first few years in the NBA. And so that combination is so rare. Very few players, if any, have had that combination of being lethal both on and off the dribble. Mark Price comes to mind, maybe Ray Allen a little bit, not to the extent that Steph is, but usually guys are either good off the dribble or off the catch, but not both. So we also had a lot of great passers on our team, especially our big guys. So we just felt like moving Steph off the ball would open up the game with some of our passing with guys like Bogut, David Lee, Draymond. And so it was really a fun way to play.
You had been a GM, you had played for Pop, you played for Phil Jackson on the triangle and other various offenses. So, specifically some of the routes, some of the ways you decided to put it together, like how did that, is there a way to encapsulate that process and explain that and how it all came together so quickly?
Yeah, I mean, I think the offense really was a hybrid of the triangle from Phil Jackson and Tex Winter and the San Antonio weak and strong motion stuff. And so we had, some of our sets were straight out of the San Antonio system, our weak roll where Steph hits ahead, cuts through, and it's swing, and we pin down onto the screener down on the block. That was Tony Parker for years in San Antonio, and it just seemed like an obvious set. The biggest thing from the triangle were the split, the low post splits. We ran that in Chicago, and I always thought it was so hard to guard, and it was a great way to get open shots for shooters, catching the ball at an angle where they can already see the hoop. So they don't have to get these pin downs where they're running away from the hoop. If you throw the ball to the low post and you get a split, if the defense makes a mistake, it's not only an open shot, but you're staring right at the rim, which I think makes it a much easier shot.
He's, probably at that time, 5'10", 5'11", skinny, shooting from his waist. Younger in high school, you can get away with that. But I'm like, okay, if you want to go to the next level, you got to change your shot from your waist. You got to get up here.
So we've heard this story several times in the past, And in the documentary, they try and show how Curry was shooting quote-unquote from his waist. But this has always been a fundamental misunderstanding of shot mechanics. These freeze frames are just showing the bottom of Curry's dip, a vital component that is most responsible for power generation. First of all, that's hilarious that his mom was disappointed in that shot selection, but let's look at where he was shooting from and if it was really from his waist. Here is his set point. The middle of the ball is even with his chin, much higher than his waist, and let's compare that to where he got to later in life. As you can see, the ball did get slightly higher, the distance from his chin to his eyes, but this is still pretty close to how it was as a little kid. The big difference is that the ball doesn't pause at the set point, creating a one-motion shot that allows beautiful energy transfer and range out to 40 feet. He always bent his arm more than 90 degrees, he always followed the ball with his eyes on the release, and while there was a slight adjustment higher, Steph never got his set point near the eyebrow level where Dell wanted him to. In the end, it was easy to see why Curry would be underrated, but it's also easy to see why people can get too hung up on looks and ignore the skill and dedication of certain players. Coming from elite athletes as parents and a father who played a long time in the NBA, it's hard to believe there would have been doubts about Steph's ability to be a productive player. That said, being drafted 7th overall is certainly a sign that teams understood this, but no one could have imagined the heights he would attain, and certainly today, no one can call him underrated.
But Allison cannot flavor your tater. Chester's de jour is all I'm here for. Skip class today, and all I could say is